All right, can everybody hear me? Gonna wait to see if people can hear me. Hello? Can people hear me? Hello? Okay, yes, awesome. All right, so hi everybody. Thank you for coming. All right, so this is going to be a little weird, but we're going to get through it. So first of all, thank you everybody for coming to listen in on remote collaboration for game developers. Woo! I know this is totally the stuff that I know everybody fantasizes about for game making, but in reality, this is going to be the thing that really saves your butt when it comes to getting a team to work from a distance, and not just in out of the ordinary circumstances, but this is actually a skill that can look really good on a developer resume for when you are perhaps working with a team remotely or setting up regular office work from home, or even when you are in an office. These are tools that still developers use to keep projects going. So yeah, here we go. Let's do it. So today we're talking about working together. And specifically, let's talk about what happens when a development team works far away from one another instead of in the same office together. So if that's you, then what you have is a distributed team, which is a team that does not all meet at the same place. So this isn't really new. Indie developers have been working, with whatever they have access to forever. And I'm not trying to make this about like indie versus AAA. I'm just saying that, indie developers are the folks who have had to kind of work, with limited resources. So this is in a way a kind of getting used to a limited resource. So indie developers have been working with this type of, model forever, because what often happens is that you'll have people that are recruited remotely through a forum. There's a big element of having a distributed indie network. And that's where I picked up a lot of these tools, is working in these ways. So for example, the indie studio made up of Ron Carmel and Kyle Gabler that made the game World of Goo, 2D Boy, they famously based their offices in whichever coffee shop they were in that day. Again, likewise, lots of teams have people all over the place. So, this is just really learning the art of working with limited resources. So how do you manage a project when your team is distributed all over the world, or you have to manage productivity over the internet? Well, I've worked on a lot of games that included some major portion of the project be done in a distributed manner, whether that be sending in art assets remotely, managing overseas physical production, or just good old-fashioned version control. We're going to talk about stuff like that today. Yes, even the version control. So, let's talk about some strategies that I've learned to help manage this process. These aren't exhaustive. This isn't, going to cover everything, but I found these particular things to be super helpful when trying to maintain productivity. By the way, sorry, my notes are below the camera, so that's why I keep looking down. So, one strategy is to establish clear roles for your team. Another is to, have a clear work. Wait, did it? I see what you did there. PowerPoint. So first is have a clear workspace or time. The second is for your team, establish clear roles. Third is have clear and accessible documentation for your project. Fourth, have regular meetings with your team. Have a well-defined pipeline for your project. Have what's called version control, and we'll go over what that means in a second. And then try to incorporate some sort of community activity into your workflow. And I'll explain that in a bit of greater detail here in a second. So first, let's talk about what it means to have a clear workspace or time. You definitely want to set aside a specific work time for yourself and try to establish a routine that allows you to go through that work time in a way that makes you feel as though I am here for work, I am here to be professional and productive. So, by the way, if anybody has any questions, please, don't hesitate to put something in the chat. I have the chat window up so I can see what's going on. So first thing about clear workspace or time is get dressed. You want to get dressed and have a hygiene routine to start your day. Again, just like you would at a workplace, don't, like, you may be wearing pajama pants, but at least try to dress in something that resembles what you'd work in, at least from the camera up. This helps you get into a mindset of productivity. If possible in your living situation, secondly, have an environment that is your clearly defined workspace. And what's important about this is that if you are working, and again, not everybody has space in their living situation that they can do this. I understand that. But, if you at least don't work on the couch in front of your TV and your video games and Netflix, or whatever streaming services you use, if you try to have a specific desk or sit at the kitchen table or something like that, have a place that will be where you are set up to work, to get work done, and then walk away from that space at the end of your designated work time. When you draw a line like that, it is easier to, pop in and pop out of that workplace mindset. Again, and also never work in bed. Bed will, that's too close to where you rest, and then you end up not moving. So again, establish set hours. Make sure that you are working at set work times. I know we're not always the best at this. I'm certainly not the best at this, but it is something that you say, it's 5 o'clock, I'm going to put my stuff down. Even if you are, and let's hope it doesn't come to crunch, but even if you are trying to get a little bit of extra productivity in, having a time to at least step away for a little while is healthy. Take breaks for physical activity, especially now. This is going to be really important. If you have access to be able to go outside, if you're near a running trail or someplace where you can go take a walk for a little while, that can be really good. Get some vitamin D, get some oxygen. But the other thing is, even if you don't have access to something like that, if you are able, try to maybe, get into a routine of like every few hours doing some push-ups or some sit-ups or something. And then a lot of people have been, if there's any like exercise videos or something that you can do, there are plenty on YouTube. I think the P90X videos have been floating around in the ether for a while, and those don't require too many actual equipment. But, have something physical to do, and, it'll actually make you better and more productive than just sitting on your butt all day. And then lastly, try to stock healthy food instead of junk food. Have, when you're reaching for a snack, try to reach for the orange or the banana instead of the bag of chips or something like that. So that can be really, that can be really good to maintain productivity, is to keep, healthy eating. Again, because if you are working remotely, it can be easy to just sort of sit all day, and that's just not good for you. So next comes clear roles. So the next thing, give everybody a primary role to fill. Now, you're not going to stick to these all the time. That's okay, especially on small teams, and I'm primarily talking to small teams here. You know, you're going to jump around. It's a necessity. So a primary role can be something like programmer, artist, sound designer, composer. It's just, I'm going to rattle through some: sound design, composer, writer, designer, and so on. So that's who is primarily in charge of what. Again, you're not always going to stick one-to-one to that small role, but I'll show you in a second how having a dedicated role on your team is really helpful, or like how you can manage, how that'll help aid productivity. To give you some idea of like areas where I've seen jumping around happen with small teams, I have observed, for example, that level design sometimes turns into, okay, everybody grab a level and, you know, we'll each make a level. That often happens with small teams instead of having one dedicated level designer. Likewise, I was once in charge of a sound team, and I have no sound design or musical talent whatsoever, but I was the person with everybody's email, so I was the head of the sound team. So it's one of those things that sometimes you will diverge, and that's okay. And in fact, again, being able to diverge in small ways can be to your benefit as a creator. But, you know, having a set role that is your number one designated duty is helpful when you use productivity software such as a Kanban board. And what is a Kanban board? So a Kanban board is a tool for assigning tasks and managing their progress. So a Kanban board looks like this. If you were to have a whiteboard with, did it freeze? So if you're having a whiteboard, Kanban, maybe it's pronounced Kanban, I don't know. So if you're having a, okay, sorry, I'm trying to watch the video a little bit, and I thought I saw it stagger a little bit, but that might just be my end because I'm streaming and doing a bunch of stuff at the same time. So good. So these boards are, oh crap, I'm touching my face. Don't worry, I've hand sanitized. I washed my hands. So the boards are, if you have a whiteboard, what you typically do is take some Post-it notes and write a task on the Post-it note and who is responsible for the task and put it up. So, you know, do the, you know, have the to-do, have the face touch counter, oh no. Have in progress, have testing, have done. You know, so that can be really helpful when you are, you know, laying this out. So what do you do when you're remote? You don't necessarily do that in real life. By the way, if we look at this picture from this game studio, we actually can see this board that's very Kanban-like in the background here. So there they are. They have it. So what do you do when you're remote, right? So there are online versions of these that can be really helpful when working with a distributed team. So this is a screenshot of the website Trello. Trello. I have it in the lower right corner. It's an online productivity site where teams can build their own boards. And so tasks are created as cards. Is my mouse visible? I want it to be visible. So each of these is a card, and each card is tagged with a color. So you can see the colors. And what those colors are is you define, like, red is, I can't remember what red was on this. I think it was design. And then, purple was programming or something like that. So, you have set colors, and that dictates what type of task it is. And then you can also, and if I pull these up, you see these bubbles, you can assign them to different users so that people know what they are responsible for. So that's really helpful when you are doing these kinds of projects. So I'm going to get out of presenter mode here for a second, and I'm going to pull up our Airtable for our new project. Okay, so here's the current Airtable. So this is another website. It's called Airtable, and this is the one for the Little Nemo project that I'm working on right now. And, sorry, throat's getting dry. For the Little Nemo project I'm doing right now. So if I look up Nemo final sprites. Okay, so it has name of the task, status in progress. I can label it, is it a bug? Now this isn't a bug, this is just me drawing, but, you can say, like, this is a bug and it'll get labeled. And then you can add a description, make nice version of Nemo sprites, and then you can have assignments, and then you can attach anything. Now this is not an ad for Airtable. I think I prefer Trello a little bit better. This is just what we are using for this particular project. But I just wanted to see you to see one that is really actively ongoing instead of just like an image of one. So test game does not restart after. So you can see where that one's not labeled a bug, but I'm not assigned to that one. I can do nothing about that. I'm just the artist. So you can see Nemo sprite roughs. But the idea is you are creating these with the ability to bake data and assignments and information about that task into these cards, and that's really powerful. So these boards are really great. I definitely recommend using them. Let me just make sure we get my presenter situation back here. You're seeing the slide full screen, but I'm getting my little presenter window here reconfigured. Okay, so the cards are really, really powerful. And that's the benefit of using this kind of tool when you're working from a distance. Are there any questions on anything so far? Okay. Questions? No? All right. So I'm going to keep... Is Trello free? Yes, Trello is free. Or it's free to use Trello. I mean, I think there's plans for everything, like advanced plans, but as far as I have ever used it, to make one of these boards is actually pretty economical. It might be like limited users or something like that. It's been a while since I've looked at the licensing. So I'm going to keep going. Clear documentation. So one thing that you want to do is make sure that everything in your project is written down somewhere. And what does that mean? So it can be text, it can be lists of features, you can have spreadsheets, you can have on those spreadsheets stats of game objects, you can have lots of diagrams, if this or sketches. If this sounds if this doesn't sound like it's too specific or laid out, that's because it's not. It's really whatever works best in terms of documentation for your team and for your project. And I'll explain what that means in a second. Because this is where it's a good idea to talk about game design documents. Now, game design documents are the sort of like in game design school, the classic first game class assignment where that's a project, is to make a game design document. And it is a job skill. The downside of the game design document, or what we call the GDD, is that it's a written document that you edit and update over time, describing the specifications for everything in your game. It's usually presented as a linear document. So, a beginning to end Word document. Now you can use links to organize that and make it more accessible, but typically they can be very difficult to use. I'm not saying don't use them. I'm saying that they're usable for certain projects. Now, I'm not going to show a picture of a game design document, even though that is a picture from a game design document. Not one of mine, just one I found on the internet. But beyond that, if you look up, game design document template on Google, you'll find tons of examples, and hopefully one that'll fit your project. So again, I will tell you with game design documents, if you're doing an old-fashioned Word-style game design document, it's not the most useful thing, depending on your team size, because they can be hard to work with. They're hard to search for team members. And you'll hear game designers complain a lot about game design documents with, your team will not read your game design document. And that's often true. I've written lots of game design documents that nobody's read. Where I do find them interesting is if I get a good format for a simple design doc, I can sit down, and if I have an original game idea, or like a first run at a game idea, I start to design doc it out, and then that'll, a good game design document will ask you questions that you didn't think you had. So, you might think about characters and levels, but the game design document might ask you about enemies and what platform it's going to be on and what's going to be in your options menu. And that sounds really boring, but it is stuff that you do want to lay out when you are actually putting these things into production. So use them, but for your team, it might be more useful to use something else. So what are those something else's? So let's talk game design document alternatives. One alternative that I've used in the past when I was doing mobile game development is a user interface wireframe. Now, wireframe is a layout, it's a draft layout of what the interface of your game or application is going to look like. And what's nice about this is it's almost like, and again, this doesn't work for everything. It's not going to work for, a sprawling open world game necessarily. Wireframes will merely be part of a larger game design document in that case. But it's useful from the standpoint of if you are making something small, like a simple mobile application or something like that, you're almost building like Frankenstein's monster, and then you hand that to somebody to pump the electricity into and make it move. And the wireframes, again, I've worked on apps where they are so simple that we just made all of the screens and then gave that a layout like the one that I found the picture of here and said, make this, and the person got it like right away. They understood what was going on. So if you're working on something simple and you're with a super small team, maybe this is enough. Other things you can do include spreadsheets. So two most powerful game making tools ever, a deck of cards, I guess 3, deck of cards, bag of dice, and a spreadsheet. So spreadsheets are great. I can't tell you exactly what to use spreadsheets for because they are used for everything. So, do you want to balance the stats of cards in your card game? Use a spreadsheet. Do you want to visualize all the components of characters or different armors or weapons in your RPG? Use a spreadsheet. this one is a spreadsheet from a Gamma Sutra article talking about the story beats in individual levels. So each level has goal, characters, items, objects, assets, events, and then different notes. And then each column there is, let me get my mouse out. Can you see the mouse? Each column is a different level. So each level can be, written out as like, what's the goal of the level? Who are the characters in the level? What are the items in the level? What are the objects that are interesting in the level? Assets, events. So that's another way that spreadsheets are useful. Lots of games, my games have lots of spreadsheets for each game because we use them for data visualization for everything. Spreadsheets are great, make them. Next is diagrams. Again, I'm not going to tell you like there is one law of the land diagram that's the best diagram. There's lots of different diagrams out there. We talked in the level design talk about molecule diagrams and things like that. This is a boss keys, Mark Brown Game Maker's Toolkit style boss key diagram for a level in the game I'm working on right now, where we wanted to visualize how does the player, access, like with lock-in key mechanisms, the different parts of this one hub environment. So we laid it out in a diagram. It's not a map, it's just a visualization that helps us understand like the logic of how this thing works. So diagramming can be really powerful. Again, you can look up different articles on diagramming for game designers. There's certainly ones out there, but starting to visualize things this way can be a really great way to get your ideas down on paper that's more visually compelling and interesting and accessible than, again, a giant Word document. My favorite of all of these is to take all of these and put them in one place that is a wiki. So using a site like Wikia, or I guess it's called fandom.com now, or a tool like MediaWiki, which is accessible if you have like a website that you can put, a wiki on with like an FTP site. But wikis are great because you can put all the information from all these other methods in one format that's easily searchable and that you can hyperlink to one another. It's the sort of like, oh no, I went to Wikipedia to look up this thing for a class and then I ended up looking at the lore of Star Wars starfighters, because you just kind of like go from link to link to link to link. And, you want to build that for your project. Maybe not that it links out to Wikipedia and then you get lost in reading about X-Wings, but, you want to have it be like information be findable, accessible, and, people to be able to navigate it easily, because then people might actually read it. So again, linear game design documents, they have their use in certain studio structures, but can be very difficult. And if you can use something like a wiki or all these other methods to visualize your data in not just a wall of text, they can be really helpful. The other nice thing about this is that when you are making something like a wiki, it's distributed automatically because you've updated the wiki on the website, instead of having to then put out a new version of the game design document, whether that be printed out in a giant binder or send out the link to everybody. So wikis are really nice for that reason. So to make a wiki, the free, easy way to do it is to go to fandom.com, which is the new name for a website called Wikia, which was like sort of a make your own wiki website from years ago. You start a wiki from their homepage by going to Wikis, Start a Wiki, and then you fill out the information that you're going to want. So any questions on that? Waiting for questions. All right, I'm just going to keep talking, and then I'm going to see if questions pop up with the delay. No, okay, cool. So the next thing you want to do is look at having regular meetings. And, you know, what's my favorite color was one of the questions, red. So next is to have regular communication with your team. This can be really tough, but you know, try to find a time that you can at least digitally digitally get together. So one of the best things to do is to establish a team chat in an application like Slack or Discord. Either is fine for me, honestly. I know there are people that say Slack is better because it allows more like workplace productivity integration, whereas Discord's really more of like gamer chat. But it's kind of up to you, to, you know, which you like and which people use in your day-to-day life. So, you know, the big thing though is to try to have weekly meetings. And, you know, if not video, you have the benefit of establishing better connection with your coworkers, even if you're just using voice chat. So each meeting should center around team members giving what they call a delta check-in. Now, delta is, you know, in math, delta is the symbol for, you know, what changed, the difference in two values. So a delta check-in is when you say what you did that week and what your progress was on the project. So, you know, having this keeps people accountable. It keeps people, you know, it gives you as a worker an idea of like, all right, I want to change a thing a week. What can I check in this week? And, you know, it's always hardest when you get up in the meeting and you say like, oh, I don't have anything this week. You know, I'm not saying that you'll never have nothing. You know, life happens, but you do having that flexibility, or having that, you know, notice of like Sunday morning, and that's when I meet with my Nemo team. Sunday morning, I'm going to have something to talk about, even if I'm getting up, you know, before the Sunday morning meeting and like drawing frames of animation. I can still say I did something. So that's really helpful. Let's see. Also, have an agenda and stick to it. Because if you are, especially if you're a team of people who know each other outside of you know, working on a project together, it's going to be really easy to get into, oh my gosh, did you see, you know, the latest Marvel movie? Did you, you know, how is your game of Persona 5 going? Like, what you're going to get into chatting about stuff, and you want to be able to stay on task. So having an agenda is really good. It makes sure that you get all of your agenda items out of the way, and then you can do the chatting about and catching up with people. You know, which again is really good for team building and communication and establishing the connection with that team. Oh, and when you do a written agenda, try to have it like on some place accessible, like either your wiki or a Google Drive, so that people can like you know, change the document. So let's talk about pipeline. So pipeline is what you want to do is clearly establish what your project's asset pipeline is. Because if you tell people, go, you know, oh, we're going to make a game about this, go. They'll just go and use whatever they are most comfortable, what they think is the best way to accomplish a task. Excuse me. And then what you're going to end up with is a bunch of assets or a bunch of code and a bunch of, you know, information that doesn't fit, is not compatible with one another, and is of different art styles, or, you know, creates different soundscapes, and suddenly your game is very discordant and weird. So how do you fix this? Well, that's why you set up a pipeline. So the first thing you want to sit down and do when you are having this kind of, you know, production setup is, well, not the first thing. The first thing when you're talking about pipeline, really. You should be probably doing everything in this lecture in order. But when you're talking about pipeline, first establish rules to maximize compatibility for all team members. So one example is if you're creating a 3D game in Unity and you have a distributed team of 3D artists. Now, what happens when you're working with a group of 3D artists like that is you're going to have the person who went to school for 3D Max, and you're going to have the person that went to school for Maya, and you're going to have the person that's been doing this a few years and doesn't have any of that and has Blender, and you're going to have models of all different types of file formats. Now, I mentioned Unity in particular because one of the early selling points of Unity was that it can take, it could take like the native file formats of all these programs, and then you can just plug them into your project. The downside of this, and what they didn't specify until you dug a little deeper, was that those, in order to do that, it would have to take that copy of Maya on your computer and use that as the translator to understand the Maya binary file. So if you had a programmer who didn't have any of that software, and this was before like free student editions, but if you had somebody like who was not dealing with 3D models directly, did not have 3D modeling software on their computer, they just had Unity, they were out of luck and couldn't actually see any of the assets because they were all incompatible with that person's computer. So what do? You would establish a rule like every 3D modeler must export your project as a .fbx file and then put it into the project folder. Suddenly, no more compatibility issues because you established a rule for exporting that type of file. Now, I'm mainly talking in artist terms here because I am a visual artist, but similar things happen if you're trying to establish consistent soundscapes, a consistent paradigm for how you're going to deal with things in your scripts, things like that. So you want to establish these things. So specify export formats and procedures for assets. You also want to establish rules, and again, I'm talking as an artist here, but this also works with, sound designers, so I'm still mostly talking about assets. It does work for programmers because, again, you want to figure out like how you're dealing with, how you're, working with your data. But you want to establish rules for how these things are made. To use artwork as an example, you want to say, we are going to use these programs, we are going to use these brush sizes, you're going to use post-processing effects set to these settings, and you're going to use like these filters in something like Unity to make effects happen. So that's, if I'm doing all this and I'm doing it in a, so this game in particular is like a Blender, sometimes stop over at Photoshop, pipeline. If somebody's like, well, I don't want to do any of that, I want to use, what is it, Clip Studio, or if I want to use, I'm probably misnaming that software, or like Fire Alpaca or something like that. You need to make sure that they are at least looking at the rule set and adapting that rule set to that new software that they want to use instead of the ones you're using, so that the assets work together. And if you do that properly, you actually can pull it off. And then, of course, all of this documented in your project wiki. Do not just have it. Don't just have it like, just download this file and look at it. Put it up in your wiki. Have a document. Make sure people are adhering to it, because that will make your life a lot easier if they have a place to go and search it out. So here's the big one for a lot of folks: version control. When you have a distributed team, it's not enough to share files, between one another. And, like you would with flash drives and things, which you shouldn't do anyway. But you really want to get out of the habit when you're in a distributed environment like this. So, and some people might say, well, what about Google Drive? It has version control. Well, it has it has document history for individual document files, and has that for other types of individual files. But if you're taking something like a Unity or an Unreal file, or really any game engine project file directory, you're not going to be able to use it for that. So what do? What happens if you're using that, your project could become corrupted. So how do we get around this? And that's what version control is for. So version control is a resource that allows you to have a place online where your team can access and contribute to a project from wherever they are by simply logging into the project's repository. How it differs from something like a Google Drive or any other cloud hard drive, basically, these are hard drives more or less, is that they establish a safeguard against projects breaking down by allowing you, and so if you see the graphic on the right side upper part of the slide, you see these this subway map of this project. It allows you to, if the top one, house gray box, breaks down, I can right click, the dot next to merge branch master of, and then, that's me getting rid of the URL for the project. But I can go to any of these dots below it and right click that dot or that line and then say revert to this version. And if something breaks, I can basically go back in time and get a non-broken version of the project. The use of that is immeasurably better than, oh no, it got corrupted in Google Drive, who has something on their flash drive. So this is a really great tool that I hope you all start to adopt. So there are many ways to do version control, such as Git or Subversion or lots of others. I have some logos of things up in the on the slide there. I realize that my chat window is blocking one for a program called SourceTree, but it's a program called SourceTree. I will bring it up actually. I will say one warning about SourceTree: it runs a little slow on Windows. So, and it really runs slow when using your internet for some reason. So we'll see if we can get through it. But I'm gonna do a basic demo of using this software. So Oh, and then the other cool thing about version control is that when you try new things, you can create what's called a branch. And that's, again, on that graphic, that's where you see the yellow offshoot and the red offshoot and the green offshoot. That's somebody saying, I want to try this new thing, but I want to isolate that new thing from the main version of the file, so that if that new thing doesn't work or breaks the project, it's isolated from everything else and it will not break the project. And again, you can revert files to previous versions, which is super nice. Any questions on that? And I'm going to let you all ask things while I get something set up here. Okay. All right, so you're seeing my Airtable. I'm going to go to Git. Oh wait, no, I already have GitHub up. Great. And then let me make sure SourceTree is loading. So, okay, so I got some questions. Some of you are asking. It looks like you've gone into GitHub and signed up for an account. It says, should I initiate a repository with a README? Yeah, sure. All that's going to do is create a text file. And what's nice about that is that it basically gives you a file to look at and mess with. Okay, so I've got things set up, and then what I'm going to do is pull Okay, so I've done a split screen here of, okay, cool, you can see the split screen. Great. So I've got a split screen here of this. This doesn't look like a whole lot of anything because this is just source tree, and then I've got GitHub. So if I create, should you keep your game documentation within your GitHub, or would a wiki be better? That's a great question. Kind of a split answer, because on one hand, I've seen lots of instances where some of that is in GitHub. The good thing about doing that in GitHub is that if you have your documentation in a document and it lives in your GitHub, if you change that documentation, commit the change, and then anytime anybody pulls that commit from your Git repository, they will get that newest version of the documentation. If you're using documentation where you don't need something big like a wiki, that could actually be very effective. The other cool thing, and this kind of is based on your own personal views of accessibility, project accessibility, but I could see a version of that where the documentation becomes like a director's notes. Otherwise, if you are working with something big, you could still do that, but wikis are also really helpful as well. When you have a big amount of documentation and you're going to need people to be able to like parse it out really well instead of having a document, just like one set document. So great question. That was excellent. Again, documentation is one of those weird things that really varies like by project. I've had game design documents that are just a series of fake screenshots, and then people are like, okay, yeah, we get it. That's our game. And then there's ones where it's like, I'm making, a giant platformer with many levels and lots of things going on, so we need to kind of break it down into different, we need to establish something big like a wiki. So, so I have GitHub up and I have source tree up. Now, if I go and I'm in my GitHub, I create new, and that'll create a new repository, and I'll call it Totter87 Git Demo, and then initialize repository with a README. This will let you, this will let you immediately clone the repository to your computer. What that means is that, so a bit of terminology, cloning a repository is basically getting a version of this on your computer. All right, so, all right, cool. I'm going to create the repo. So here's my Git repo, and I'm going to dismiss. So let me, there. So here's my repo. You're going to hear people call it a repo a lot. So I could add a description if I wanted to, and it has a README file. So that's the initial commit. So a commit is when you are putting that information onto the Git repo. So you are making a change and committing the change. And I will show you what that means in a second. So first things first we want to do to get this on our computer. So this is basically a file location on the internet. And here you can see, are there issues with it? Are there pull requests? But the other thing you can find here is if I go to code, see one commit, there's the commit, one branch. Now that's really important because here's our branches. Okay, so remember that subway map with like the diverging pathways in source tree, that is your branches. So if I were working on a project and I wanted branch for trying out new game character physics, I would make that a branch, and then I would put that branch off to the side so that you could still test the master thing, and it wouldn't change anything about that master version. It would just be its own version. So to get this on my machine, I'm going to click this green button that says clone or download. What that means is that clone with HTTPS. Use Git or check out with SVN using the web URL. So SVN is one way to access Git. I'm not going to show it today, but there is this really great tool called Tortoise SVN, which basically puts the repo management functions of version control into your web interface. I guess, you know what I could do? I have a project with Tortoise going on my computer right now. If I bring up the file folder, and then I go to documents, everybody don't look at my documents is all over the place. So if I go to Dead Man's Trail SVN, and I go to branches, I have one branch in here. If I right click this, so this is SVN, this isn't Git. But I can go to Tortoise SVN and see I can resolve, update to a revision, I could revert, which means, I could like go back in time, I can clean up, which means like solve issues with things, but I can do I can create a branch here. So this is Tortoise SVN, you can download it. I can also update, which I need to do at some point, but this update would be like to pull the latest version from the repo, which again I need to do for that project at some point, not right now. But that's what Tortoise looks like. It's just integrated into your actual file browser. To use this, so we're going to use source tree as a interface for Git. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this web address and I'm going to copy it to my clipboard. Okay, I think it was copied. You can also just download it, but that's just downloading. It's not connected. So I'm going to do that. Now I'm going to, in source tree, I'm going to go up here, I'm going to create a new tab, and that tab is going to show me my repos. See, there's my Nemo repo, and there's just like me messing around. So what I can do here is go to clone up here. If I click that, I get a source path. So I can put in my web address, and then I go to destination, and what that does is it'll create C users, Chris Totten, documents, Git demo, and we'll just let it do that. And then if I click, once it stops doing this, and it may not stop right now because it's, well, that went pretty fast. Sometimes it takes a minute, so it says this is a Git repository. So it's identifying the type, and then it'll kind of go through this. Okay, so I can actually clone it. So then it'll do stuff. Like I said, it's not the fastest on Windows, so it may not even do what we want it to do. I have a backup on the PowerPoint for... Wow, it's doing it. It's behaving today. Oh man, good job, source tree. Now let's see if this takes a while. Okay. Aha, now it's frozen? Did it do it? Or is it doing it? Okay, cool. Wow. So it doesn't look like anything right now, but if I were to go into my repo now and documents, Git demo, there's my README, and then if I create a new text document, and I'll just call it Hi Students. And then in this, oh, what'd you do? New tab. It's just being finicky because I'm also streaming. All right, well, that's fine. I have backups. Anyway, gold star for source tree. Okay, so as you can see, let me bring up my my lecture notes. All right, so here's that picture of that interface in source tree again. What happens when you have a new working version of your file is that, it'll tell you everything, like all the files that need changing are in the top window. And then what I'll do is I would type in the bottom window, that text box, I'd type in, add in a new file called Hello Students, and then I'd click that button that says commit. And then that would add a commit to my repo. And it doesn't go online until I click the button up on top that says push. And once I've pushed that, then it would appear on GitHub as a new commit. So I would have initial commit and then new commit, which is the commit where I did the, added the Hi Students file. So does that make sense to everybody? I'm just going to keep going and I'll wait for the chat to catch up. So again, this is what the interface looks like when you're looking at the log history part. Again, you can see what it looks like when, if I'm pushing to the main blue branch right now, if I wanted to have a separate branch where I put like a 3D model or something, but I'm like trying things out with the 3D model and I'm worried about how it's going to turn out, then I can make another branch. And again, there's buttons up on top for branch, merge branch, things like that. There's much more to Git than that. And it is a complex thing, but I hope that this at least gives you some like basic idea of how to use something. And source tree, as sluggish as it can be on Windows, because it's actually like native to Mac, but as sluggish as it can be on Windows, I find that as a visual person, it's a nice like visualization of what's going on in my project. And other than using like command line Git, which you should learn to use. And I'm sharing some resources, by the way, in our class's Discord chat that actually does help you learn Git in like the command line way as well. I would do that because that helps you understand like the logic of what it's doing. It's like the hard way, but it teaches you the logic of what you're doing. But I would say definitely try to use Git for your projects because it'll save your life in terms of your project and being able to go back and not having that broken file. Again, it's also useful for even if you are just storing 3D models. Sometimes it can be kind of nice for that. So the last thing I want to talk about is community activity. And why do community activity? So when I say this, I mean establish pages on social gaming sites early on. Now, eventually all games get to the point where they're not looking that nice. You're past the initial, like, we're going to make a game, this is going to be awesome. The initial, like, planning phases it's easy to get very excited about, and you're just in the phases where it's like, oh, I'm having to, like, put work into this glitchy, buggy thing. It's really ugly. So how do you get past that? Well, social media and game pages can really help. And it's nice because, again, just like having to do a weekly Delta update with your team, so your team is holding you accountable, or you're using your team so that you can be holding yourself accountable when you think about, like, what is my Delta going to be this week? The other thing you can do is if you say, well, what am I going to show on Screenshot Saturday this week? And again, life happens, people get that. But, if you are using these mechanisms to stay on your project and keep your project going and keep having things to show, that can be really helpful. It can be a good, frankly, mental health thing for your project to give yourself, and I know somebody would say, no, actually that increases pressure. Use what works best for you. But, I find it helps me motivate to say I need something visual every week. So what does that look like? Social media, having a Twitter account, using hashtags like Screenshot Saturday or IndieDev are super helpful. Establishing a game page on something like IndieDB or GameJolt or Itch. And then providing project updates. I really like GameJolt because it has a blog. It has direct comments. Itch is more of like a storefront page. There are community aspects to it as well, but it's not as self-contained. Ultimately be on as much as you can to get your game out there as much as you can. But, based on the community you want, it might dictate like which page you want to be on. Social media is great because you can say, hey, I made a sprite, check out my sprite. And, it's kind of nice. Like, I had an experience with my card game La Mancha where I posted, actually, I think it was my, like, your post from 2 years ago, like today at the time of this recording, was this post that I did of the first round of art that I made for it. And it got liked by people in the industry whose, opinions, like, I wasn't talking about the project that much at that time. It got liked by people whose opinions I really valued. And seeing that helped me say, okay, this thing might actually have some legs. So, posting to Facebook or Twitter, Instagram, things like that, it can be really tough to feel like, oh no, this is where people are going to judge me. But more often than not, if you are going to these particular hashtags especially and controlling the visibility of your posts, you're going to find a supportive audience. And in your followers, you might gain new followers that are supportive, or your followers who are supportive will share your work and be like, this is awesome. And that's why you use hashtags like Screenshot Saturday, or its cousin Screenshot Sunday for when you want to do Screenshot Saturday, but the work is done on Sunday. Hashtag IndieDev, hashtag GameDev. Those are all really great because, again, it gives you that little, like, in the middle of the doldrums of, like, I'm just making hand-drawn sprites and this is just animation and I don't have any cool, juicy gameplay bits for you. It can just keep you moving because you're getting, that positive feedback and people are being like, hey, good job. Any questions on that? So I'm going to keep going while the chat catches up to the questions. But to recap, distributed team strategies, establish clear roles, then go back in time and have a set workspace or time daily to work on your stuff. Make sure that you have clear, accessible documentation. So the things that help with some of these things, if you have a room or a table or a piece of furniture that is your workspace, that's not your living space, that's super helpful. Never work in bed. Try to work away from the TV. Maybe even have like work music that you don't normally listen to. I like instrumental music. A lot of video game music actually helps me work, or just kind of stuff I can halfway tune out. Clear roles. Establish clear roles. Understand you will divert from them from time to time, and that is okay. Use a Kanban board or Kanban, whichever way you pronounce it. Somebody pointed out I was listening to morning jazz this morning to kind of like, loosen up a little bit after the stressful week. That's great. Clear roles and using a task tagging method like a Kanban board or Kanban, that you can say this is Max's task, this is Kree's task, this is Jen Doty's task, Jen's task. Sorry, I was looking at the chat when somebody came on, so sorry for blurting out names, but the saying this is so and so's task is with a piece of software like that is super good. Having regular meetings, establishing regular, meetings at the same time every week or every, X amount of time. Some people do daily, some people do twice a week, some people do weekly. It kind of depends, weekly or twice a week is, what I've seen mostly. But having those regular work time meetings are really great. They allow you to say, I'm going to have something by this time. Well-defined pipeline. Establish the rules for what your file types are going to be. Establish like how each thing is going to be produced. What is the logic of when do you produce things? What are the steps that you follow? What are the brush sizes or file sizes or the filters that you're going to use on your sound assets? Or the different plugins you're going to use in the engine itself. You want to establish what those are so that nobody submits something that you can't use. Do version control. Again, if you're not coming from a computer science background, it can seem like it has a big barrier to entry, but once you understand how to do it, it's magic. It allows you to somebody said Back to the Future in the chat. It allows you to go, Back to the Future or back to the past and then the future. It allows you to time travel in your project, and that's really helpful because then you'll be able to like safeguard your work. Let's see, and then lastly, do good community activity stuff because that's going to help you. That's going to help you keep your head up in this. Your team will help you keep your head up, but your community activity and showing stuff and being able to report back to the team and say, oh my gosh, people really liked it, is going to keep your team's head up during the project. And that's it.